part 2 of my basic brush lettering series. Now in the first part we looked at very basic letter formation, how to create thick and thin strokes and how to work with curves and elements like that. So once you've mastered that and you're really getting used to forming your letters and your words, this is where part 2 comes in. So what we're going to be talking about here is altering your spacing to fit different areas. So if you're doing things like a piece of wall art, for example, and you need your words to fit within a certain space, this is where this will come in handy. I'm going to be showing you lots of different shadowing techniques, how to highlight your letters as well. And we're going to actually look a little bit more into how to bounce your letters and then different letter formations as well. So how you can slightly edit each of your descenders and your curves to give you even more of a flowing look. So I hope you enjoy this video, and please don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, follow on Facebook, follow on Instagram as well, and let me know in the comments if there's anything that you'd like to know so I can cover it in a later video. Thank you for watching. So in this section of my 2-part video series, I want to now cover some more in-depth techniques with your brush lettering. So you should have now learned how to basically start forming the words. So in part 1 we've covered a number of things. So that is how to achieve thick and thin lines, different ways of forming your letters. We've briefly looked at the baseline, although I'm going to re-go over that again. And then what we've also looked at is forming those curves so we don't have a step from one to another. In this section I'm going to look at a couple of extra options for you. So these are going to be adding finishing touches, so highlights and shadows. We're going to have a look also at bounce again. We're going to also have a look at spacing of your letters. So here's our basic letters that you should hopefully have started learning how to put together in the last video. Now we're going to look first of all at adjusting the size and the spacing of your letters. So as you go along, what you might find is that you start lettering depending on either your general handwriting as it is now or the worksheets that you've been working from. So if you're used to working from quite large worksheets, your lettering will start off quite large and you may find it hard to adjust to doing much smaller. While you've got large brush pens, you will find larger letters easier. You need to, much like your handwriting, if you're writing a birthday card, you'll write it nice and neat. If you're scribbling a shopping list, you'll adjust that for the speed. So you need to start learning to do the same with your lettering. Now, a couple of different options for you. If you're spacing, so for example, if you have an area that you really need to fill, always go in with a pencil first. But a couple of things you can do is adjust the gaps that are between your lettering. So for example, this, I'm just going to do the word space, and I've actually left much longer gaps between each one of my letters here. So that's made it much wider. If I want to close those gaps in, I can do so by bringing my letters much longer, much taller, and much closer together. Like so. So it really depends on the space that you're working in, but it's very easily done using these connecting lines and making them longer to suit where you need to fill. But again, if you can, use a pencil first of all. Now you have your basic letters down, we can start making them a little more fancy as well. This is going to be totally your preference and you will find your own style, but it's good to experiment while you're still learning until you find your way and you're dead set on one. Now, a couple of things you can do. So if you're working with letters that have a baseline descender, so for example the letter N, if we bring this up, down, like so, this is going to be a descender that stops on that baseline at the bottom there. So what you can do with this is do exactly the same, maybe bring this a little bit higher and this lower than the usual baseline here. So our baseline, just so you can visualize it, is here. Then you can do the same with your M's, for example, and with the M's you can bring first hump down there, you could bring that down, You could bring the next hump not quite as high and that last descender much lower. So that's one way you could do this, but not just for N's and M's. You could also do this perhaps for your R's. And I like to also do it for things like my S's as well. Well, usually the baseline would be somewhere around here. Another tip for you is working with any letters that curve and come up. So for example, if we look at our A and we have the finishing stem there. So we can make this a little more fancy, a little more flowy by coming round. Don't forget to press down from the top, and then as we come up, do a little bit of a curve there. So you can see we've got a bit of a wave on there, and then come down. Now there's nothing wrong with lifting your pen up and stopping. So then that A would look more like so. And you can do this for a number of letters. So for example, let's do a G. So when you first start, your G may be quite basic, as you would learning to write normally. And then your G, if you start pressing down at the very top, our curve has that wave to it, and then we can press down, maybe give a little bit of a wave to the descender as well, and loop that back up. So then our lettering is starting to look a little more flowy and a little more modern as well. Now we did start covering the bounce technique in part 1 of this video series, but I want to go over it again so that you can really see in depth how I make my bounce nice and even. So if I write the word bounce without bouncing, you'll see that everything is sitting on the same line here. So I'll keep my letters quite formal, fairly straight, nothing out of the ordinary, like so. So there's the word bounce. Now what I'm going to do is actually bounce those. So where each of the letters sits, I'm going to vary that. Now a good way to get started with this, if you're worried about this being uneven, is to actually draw some baselines. So if I draw one, leave a letters gap, draw another, leave a letters gap, draw another, and then we have 6 letters here. So maybe have one up here, and have one here. There. And you can use those as a guide. Now what I like to do is draw in pencil and very, very lightly erase these as well, so I can just see them. And then use these as a guide for your letters. So my B is going to sit around here, and it doesn't matter if you come a little bit off. There we go. So you can see then we've really got that bouncy movement. My pencil lines, if I just highlight those for you so you can see, sat and there. You can see that up, down, and that really does make a lovely difference to your lettering, especially once you start bringing in those different letter formations that we've just been talking about. Lastly in this section, I want to talk to you about finishing off your letters, adding a little bit of detail to really make them pop. Now I've got 3 different shadowing techniques for this. The first is using a pale grey pen, and this would be a brush pen as well. Now this is probably the easiest one because it's a little more relaxed. If you make a mistake, it doesn't really show because it's so pale. Now with this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my grey and I'm going to do a fairly thick stroke down the right hand side of each of your current thick strokes. Now this will, as it dries, lighten up, but there are very light greys that you can buy if you want to. So you can see I'm only going where the thick strokes already are, and you can see how that has added a bit of a drop shadow and lifted it up. Now another option for you is to do a similar technique but with a thin pen. So you can go down the right hand side of each of the thicker lines, and now I'm avoiding any joins. So where the B loops around and comes up into the R, I'm avoiding that there and leaving the gap. But just go where all your thick strokes are down the right hand side. Now you can, of course, if you want to, go down the right hand side of every single stroke. This is, of course, if you're doing a long quote, for example, this is going to take you a little while. And I don't think it makes too much difference to the after effect. It can sometimes end up a little bit too complicated if you have too many shadow effects in there. You can see that's then lifted that up just a little bit. You can, if you want to, do both of these on one letter. So you're really highlighting the very edge of the letter, and then you have that drop shadow as well. This is great if you've overlapped your grey and your original letter colour and you just want to determine the line between the two to maybe mask that a little bit. So this is sometimes a good option as well. Now lastly, another way of lettering, which I'm going to do down here, is quite a fun way, and that's, we're coming off to the right hand side this time, and we're not actually touching the letter at all. I'm going to leave a few millimeters. Again, I'm working with the larger thick strokes, so the downward strokes, and I'm just going to come in and follow the edge of the letter, leaving a gap. It's almost as if the entire letter has got a white outline, so you're avoiding touching at all, and that's as close to the letter as you want to get, and any other lines as well. See where the E joins onto the T? I've actually stopped my line a few millimeters short of that as well. So as you can see, this is quite almost a cartoony effect, and I always do my loops as well, and this makes it look as if there's some movement to your lettering, and again that everything is just jumping off the page. Now I would always say with your highlights or letters, when you're shadowing, please don't rush, because it is just as important as the original letter formation. If you make a mistake with your shadowing, that's everything you've already put into practice then ruined. So that's 3 ways of shadowing. Lastly, highlights. There's numerous white pens on the market. You want one that's really opaque when it dries, and I would suggest if you're going to do this, allow your ink to dry first, because otherwise what can happen is the white ink in the pen can mix with the damp ink on your paper, and rather than, for example, on here, rather than having a white, I may get a pale blue and it could bleed completely. So what we're going to do is then go to the right within the letter, so within each of the thick strokes, stick to the right and add a line down those thick strokes. And it doesn't matter whether it's a full line, or let me just zoom into that for you a little bit. There we go. It doesn't matter whether it's a full line or whether you decide on your long strokes to do a line with gaps. Sometimes I like to just run the pen, and as you know with gel pens, sometimes the ink can stop flowing slightly and jump a little bit, and that's actually not a bad effect at all. It looks more of a natural shine that way if the ink isn't quite flowing perfectly anyway. There we go. So that's how to add highlights. Now I hope you've enjoyed these videos and learnt something. If you want to keep up with other videos that I've been doing, please do hit subscribe on YouTube, find me on Facebook, follow me there, it's just Lou Collins. The same on Instagram, Lou Collins on there, follow me on there. I put lots of videos, lots of images up there, tips and tricks as I come across them, and of course as and when we develop new lettering products, they will be available as well. Thank you very much for watching.